The morning rain had left the city streets gleaming like polished silver. Inside Madison's corner cafe, the smell of fresh coffee mingled with the sweet aroma of cinnamon rolls just pulled from the oven. It was the kind of neighborhood place where regulars knew each other's names, and strangers often became friends over a second cup of coffee. Margaret Hayes had worked at Madison's for nearly 3 years now. At 28, she wore her blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her white-collared shirt and navy apron were always spotless. There was something gentle about Margaret, something that made people feel at ease. Perhaps it was the way she really listened when customers spoke, or how she remembered that Mr. Patterson took his coffee black with 1 sugar, never 2. She had grown up not far from here, in a small apartment above her grandmother's flower shop. Her grandmother had taught her that kindness costs nothing but means everything. Those words had stayed with Margaret through lean times and hard seasons. Now, as she wiped down tables and refilled sugar dispensers, she carried that simple wisdom with her like a warm stone in her pocket. The cafe was unusually busy for a Tuesday morning. The rain had driven people indoors, seeking shelter and comfort. Margaret moved between tables with practiced ease, her smile genuine, her manner unhurried despite the crowd. That's when she noticed him. Thomas Crawford stood near the entrance, and even in this casual cafe, he looked like he belonged somewhere else entirely. His dark suit jacket, slightly dampened by the rain, probably cost more than Margaret made in a month. His dark hair was swept back, showing the kind of grooming that came from expensive salons. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the bearing of someone used to commanding rooms full of people. But it wasn't his appearance that caught Margaret's attention. It was the tiny baby he held against his chest, and the look of complete helplessness on his face. The infant, no more than a few months old, was dressed in a soft gray outfit that matched the father's jacket. The baby's face was red and scrunched, mouth open in distress. The cries were growing louder, more insistent, cutting through the gentle murmur of cafe conversation. Thomas tried rocking the baby. Then he tried gentle bouncing. He adjusted the little one's position, checked the diaper bag slung over his shoulder, and attempted to offer a pacifier that was immediately rejected. Nothing worked. The baby's cries only intensified. Margaret watched as other patrons began to stare. Some looked sympathetic, others annoyed. She saw Thomas's jaw tighten, saw the way his shoulders tensed with frustration and embarrassment. Here was a man who clearly solved problems for a living, who made decisions that probably affected hundreds of people, and he couldn't soothe his own child. She had seen that look before. The particular panic of a parent who has tried everything and run out of options. Without thinking too much about it, Margaret picked up a fresh pot of chamomile tea and approached his table. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the baby's cries. "Would you like some hot water? Sometimes the steam can be calming." Thomas looked up at her, and she could see the exhaustion in his gray eyes. "Thank you, but I don't think anything will help right now. My assistant usually handles. I'm not usually—" He trailed off, looking back at the baby with concern. Margaret set down the pot and clasped her hands together. "Would you mind if I tried something? I used to help my sister with her little ones." For a moment, Thomas hesitated. She could see him weighing the situation, the natural caution of someone who didn't easily trust strangers. But the baby's cries were becoming more desperate, and sometimes desperation opens doors that pride keeps closed. "Please," he said simply. Margaret came around the table and held out her hands. Thomas carefully transferred the baby to her, and she noticed how his hands lingered for a moment, protective even in letting go. The baby was warm and solid in her arms. Margaret held the little one against her shoulder and began to walk, not quickly but with a slow, swaying rhythm. She hummed softly, an old lullaby her grandmother used to sing. Something wordless and gentle. Her hand moved in slow circles on the baby's back, and she bent her head close, whispering sounds that were more feeling than words. At first, nothing changed. The cries continued, piercing and persistent. But Margaret didn't rush. She just kept walking, kept humming, kept that steady circular motion. She moved past the window where raindrops traced patterns on the glass, past the bookshelf filled with donated novels, past the corner where morning light pooled warm and golden. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the cries began to soften. The rigid little body relaxed against her shoulder. the hiccuping sobs spaced further apart. And then, like magic, except it wasn't magic at all, but something older and simpler, the baby quieted. Margaret continued her gentle swaying, not wanting to break the spell. She could feel the tiny heartbeats slowing, the breathing deepening. The baby's small fist clutched at her collar, and she smiled at the gesture, so trusting, so complete. When she finally returned to the table, the baby was calm, eyes heavy-lidded and peaceful. She carefully transferred the little one back to Thomas, who looked at her as if she'd performed some impossible miracle. "How did you—" he began, then shook his head. "I've been trying for an hour." Margaret smiled. "Sometimes they just need a different rhythm. Every baby's got their own song, you just have to find it." She started to step away to return to her other tables, but Thomas gently touched her arm. "Wait, please sit down for a moment. I'm Thomas, by the way. Thomas Crawford. And this is Henry." Margaret hesitated, glancing around at her other tables. But the morning rush had eased. She slid into the chair across from him. "I'm Margaret Hayes." "Margaret," Thomas repeated, as if committing it to memory. He looked down at baby Henry, now dozing peacefully in his arms. "You have a gift. My wife, my late wife, she had that same way with him." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Margaret felt her heart squeeze with understanding. Now the expensive suit and the helpless expression made sense. Here was a man learning to navigate the world alone, learning to be both father and mother to a tiny person, who needed more than he knew how to give. "I'm so sorry," Margaret said quietly. Thomas nodded, his thumb gently stroking Henry's soft cheek. "It's been 4 months. Elizabeth got sick very suddenly. We thought it was just exhaustion from the pregnancy, but—" He stopped, took a breath. "Henry was only 6 weeks old when she passed." Margaret didn't offer empty platitudes or false comfort. She had learned from her grandmother that sometimes silence speaks, louder than words. She just sat with him in that moment, sharing the weight of it. "I run a company," Thomas continued, his voice low. "I have 200 employees. I negotiate deals worth millions. But this—" He looked at his sleeping son. "This is harder than anything I've ever done. My assistant, Rebecca, she's been helping, but she had a family emergency today. Her mother fell. I told her to go, of course, but that left me and Henry. I had a meeting scheduled nearby. Thought I could manage for a few hours." He smiled ruefully. "Turns out I couldn't." "You're managing now," Margaret said gently. "He's peaceful. You got him here, you kept him safe. That's what matters." Thomas looked at her with something like gratitude. "Do you have children?" "No," Margaret said. "But I helped raise my sister's 3 kids while she worked double shifts at the hospital. I know the difference between a hungry cry and a tired cry, between gas pain and teething. My grandmother used to say babies are honest. They tell you exactly what they need. You just have to learn their language." "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." "She was. She passed 2 years ago. Left me her flower shop, but I couldn't keep it running. The neighborhood changed. People bought flowers online. So I came here." She gestured around the cafe. "It's a good place. People are kind here." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Around them, the cafe hummed with quiet activity. Someone laughed at a corner table. The espresso machine hissed and steamed. Rain continued its gentle percussion against the windows. "Margaret," Thomas said finally, "I know this is highly unusual, but I need to ask you something." She waited, curious but not apprehensive. "Rebecca will be out for at least a week, maybe 2. I have a nanny, Mrs. Chen, but she only works evenings. I can't miss work, not right now. There's too much at stake for too many people. But I can't bring Henry to the office every day. He needs—" Thomas paused, choosing his words carefully. "He needs what you just gave him. That kindness, that knowing." Margaret began to understand where this was going. "Would you consider helping me? Just temporarily, until Rebecca returns. I'd pay you well, very well. You could bring Henry to the office or work from my home, whatever makes sense. He looked at his son, and the vulnerability in his expression was striking. "I just need help keeping him happy, keeping him safe." Margaret's first instinct was to refuse. She barely knew this man. She had responsibilities at the cafe, but something made her pause. She looked at baby Henry, at his small, sleeping face, at the way his tiny fingers curled against his father's chest. She thought about her grandmother's words. Kindness costs nothing but means everything. What hours would you need me? She asked. Thomas's face brightened with hope. 7 to 5, Monday through Friday. I could provide a car to pick you up, bring you home, whatever you need. Margaret thought of her modest studio apartment, the bills that were always a little tight, the way she sometimes chose between heat and groceries. She thought of Madison's, where her boss was understanding, but where she couldn't afford to take unpaid leave. I'd need to work it out with my manager here, she said slowly. Maybe morning shifts only before I come to you? I'll pay you 3 times what you make here, Thomas said quietly. You could afford to take the time off if you wanted, or keep this job if it matters to you. That's your choice. 3 times her salary. Margaret's breath caught. That kind of money could change everything. She could pay off her grandmother's medical debts that she'd inherited. She could save something for the future. She could stop living quite so close to the edge. But she wasn't thinking about the money, not really. She was thinking about that moment when Henry had relaxed in her arms, when his cries had given way to peace. She was thinking about Thomas's exhausted eyes and the way he held his son like something infinitely precious and infinitely fragile. All right, she said. I'll help you. The relief on Thomas's face was profound. They exchanged phone numbers and made arrangements. Thomas would send a car for her the next morning. They would try it for a few days, see how it worked. As Margaret stood to return to her duties, Thomas caught her hand. Thank you, he said, and the words held more weight than simple gratitude. You have no idea what this means. But Margaret thought she did. She saw it in the way he held Henry, in the lines of worry around his eyes, in the determination mixed with fear. She recognized the look of someone trying their best and terrified it wouldn't be enough. We'll figure it out together, she said simply. The next morning, a sleek black car pulled up outside Margaret's apartment building. The driver was courteous and professional, and the ride to Thomas's townhouse on the Upper West Side felt surreal. Margaret clutched her worn canvas bag, feeling suddenly aware of how different their worlds were. The house was beautiful but not ostentatious. Tall windows, hardwood floors, rooms filled with light. There were photos on the mantel, and Margaret's eyes were drawn to them. A dark-haired woman with a radiant smile, laughing as Thomas kissed her cheek. The same woman, pregnant and glowing. Thomas and the woman on their wedding day, young and full of dreams. That's Elizabeth, Thomas said softly, coming to stand beside her. He held Henry against his shoulder, the baby alert now and looking around with wide eyes. She'd like you, I think. She always said the best people are the ones who lead with kindness. Margaret smiled. She sounds wonderful. She was. The weeks that followed developed their own rhythm. Margaret arrived each morning at 7. She fed Henry, changed him, played with him on the soft carpet while Thomas prepared for work. She learned Henry's preferences. He liked being held facing outward, so he could see the world. He calmed best with a specific lullaby. He napped most peacefully in the sunny room at the back of the house. Sometimes Thomas worked from home, and Margaret would hear him on conference calls, his voice firm and decisive. But during breaks, he would emerge to find her and Henry, and his face would soften. He began teaching himself to do the things Margaret did, the particular way of holding Henry, the gentle bouncing, the soft songs. You're getting good at this, Margaret told him one afternoon, watching as he successfully settled Henry for a nap. I have a good teacher, Thomas replied. They talked during those quiet moments, sharing stories from their very different lives. Thomas spoke of the pressure of running his late father's company, of trying to honor Elizabeth's memory while moving forward into an uncertain future. Margaret shared memories of her grandmother's flower shop, of neighborhood characters and small kindnesses that had shaped her understanding of the world. One evening, Thomas came home earlier than usual. Margaret was sitting in the rocking chair by the window, Henry drowsy in her arms, the late afternoon sun turning everything golden. Don't move, Thomas said quietly. That's beautiful. Margaret looked down at Henry, at his peaceful face, and felt a warmth spread through her chest. She realized somewhere along the way this had stopped being just a job. She loved this little boy. She loved his toothless smiles, his delighted coos, the way he reached for her when she entered a room. Margaret, Thomas said, sitting down across from her, I need to talk to you about something. Her heart skipped. Was this the end? Had Rebecca returned? Rebecca called today. Her mother is going to need long-term care. She's decided to relocate to be near her. Thomas paused. That means I need permanent help with Henry, not just temporary. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. I'd like you to stay, not as a stopgap measure, but as Henry's nanny, as part of our lives. You've brought something to this house that's been missing since Elizabeth died. Light, warmth. Henry adores you. And He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. I'm grateful for you. More than I can say. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. I'd like that, she said softly. I'd like that very much. Thomas smiled, and it transformed his face, erasing years of worry and sadness. Good, that's really good. Over the months that followed, Margaret became an integral part of their small family. She was there for Henry's first tooth, his first solid foods, his first attempts at sitting up. She celebrated these milestones with Thomas, sharing in his joy and pride. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something else grew between them. It was there in the way Thomas made sure her favorite tea was always stocked. In the way Margaret stayed late some evenings, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. In the comfortable silences that spoke of deep understanding. One rainy evening, so like that first day at the cafe, Margaret was preparing to leave when Thomas stopped her at the door. Margaret, wait! There's something I need to say. She turned, her heart beating faster. These months with you they've changed everything. Henry is thriving, but it's more than that. You've helped me find my way back to living, not just existing. You've reminded me that joy is still possible, that tomorrow can hold good things. He stepped closer. I know our arrangement is professional. I know there are boundaries, but I also know that what I feel for you goes beyond gratitude. You're in my thoughts constantly. When something good happens, you're the one I want to tell. When Henry does something new, I want to share it with you first. Margaret's breath caught. She had felt it too, this growing connection, but had been afraid to name it. I'm not asking you to decide anything right now, Thomas continued. I just needed you to know. Life is too short and too precious for me to leave important things unsaid. Margaret set down her bag. I feel it too, she said quietly. I've tried not to, tried to keep things simple, but my heart doesn't listen to logic. I love Henry, and She took a breath. I love you too. Thomas closed the distance between them and took her hands in his. Then perhaps we could see where this leads? Take things slowly, let it develop naturally? Margaret nodded, smiling through tears. I'd like that. Their kiss was gentle, tentative, full of promise. Upstairs, Henry made a soft sound in his sleep, and they both laughed, breaking apart to check the baby monitor. A year later, on a bright spring morning, Margaret stood in Madison's corner cafe, now holding a 1-year-old Henry, who babbled happily and waved at familiar faces. The staff had become like family, celebrating every milestone in their unconventional story. Thomas wrapped his arm around her waist and she leaned into him, marveling at how much had changed since that rainy morning when a crying baby had brought them together. You know, Thomas said, I've been thinking about Elizabeth lately, about what she'd make of all this. Margaret tensed slightly, but Thomas squeezed her gently. I think she'd be happy. She always said love isn't diminished by being shared. It multiplies. She'd love that Henry has you, that I have you. Margaret felt tears sting her eyes. I hope so. I wish I could have known her. In a way, you do. You're raising her son. You're loving him the way she would have. That's a kind of knowing. They stayed a while longer, drinking coffee and letting Henry charm the other patrons. When they finally left, Margaret took one last look around the cafe where everything had begun. Sometimes, she thought, the most extraordinary chapters of our lives begin with the smallest acts of kindness. A quiet offer of help, a gentle rhythm, a willingness to step beyond boundaries and see another person's need. That morning, she had simply wanted to comfort a crying baby. She couldn't have known she was also comforting a grieving father, that she was opening a door to a new family, a new future, a new understanding of what love could be. As they walked out into the spring sunshine, Henry in her arms and Thomas by her side, Margaret sent a silent thank you to her grandmother. Kindness costs nothing but means everything. Those words had guided her through that first uncertain morning, and they guided her still. In the end, they had all found what they needed. Henry had a mother's love. Thomas had a partner to share the joys and sorrows of life. And Margaret had a family, a place where she belonged, where her gentle heart and quiet strength were not.